Uh, Good morning. Here we are at Temple Baptist Church, and we're looking at Daniel chapter 4 this morning, but there's some things that I want to see that I want to show you. I kind of want to lay the groundwork here to prepare for the lesson, because there's some things that we see in this lesson that God hates, and because He hates it so bad, He's going to call King Nebuchadnezzar on it and on his attitude in this. And one of these things back over in the book of Proverbs in chapter 6, verse 17, it talks about beginning in verse 16, it says there, "These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yet 7 are an abomination unto Him." And it goes on and lists these things, and the very first thing at the top of the list is a proud look. And then he goes on and says, a lying hand, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, or somebody that stirs up trouble all the time, a false witness that speaketh lies, and then he ends that with he that soweth discord among the brethren. But the very top of that list is a proud look, a proud spirit. And then over in 16, Proverbs chapter 16, again, these are some things that that God does not like, and He will not tolerate these in His people. And so to look at that in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 5, it says, "Every one that is proud in heart is an abomination unto the Lord." That's pretty plain. It says, though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished. And then he jumps over there in verse 18. He said, "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Better it is to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than divide the spoil with the pride." With pride. And so anyway, then to get back over here into Daniel chapter 4, and we see Nebuchadnezzar, and he is eat up with pride. If arrogance and pride was his mainstay, that was the way he lived and the way he operated. And so God has tried to, in the past, He has tried to kind of break him of that, to help him to see that there is one Jehovah, Yahweh God, and he has paid lip service to this a little bit with this statue that he made, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in a fiery furnace, and these things, but now God has said, okay, enough's enough. I am tired of this, and we're going to show you that you are not all that you think you are. And so it's interesting that in chapter 4, there's some things there that they're not any place else in really in the whole Bible. And in chapter 4 there's 3 verses that there's a word used there for the watcher. There's 3 times in that chapter it's used. In verse 13, he said, "I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven." And he came and he told Nebuchadnezzar about this warning of what was getting ready to happen to him. And he then again in verse 17, that is singular. Then in verse 17 it's plural, and he uses that again, and it's the same thing. And he is warning Nebuchadnezzar that these things this vision that he's had is going to come to him. And then again in verse 23 of that very same chapter, it's the same thing again, the same thing. And Nebuchadnezzar calls all his astrologers and his Chaldeans and his soothsayers, and he gets all of them together, and they can't give him a interpretation of this vision that he had. Now, in the Old Testament, when we talk about this, we see we see a lot where people are having dreams and dreams mean to them. God means something to them. God will speak to them through dreams, and those are things that when they're in bed asleep and these things come to them. But then these visions are things that they have when they're just by themselves meditating, and God will send these visions to them. So anyway, it was kind of interesting to me that when this vision came and these watchers came and they shared this vision with Nebuchadnezzar, that given his history with Daniel, because he's known Daniel ever since he was probably a teenage boy, that when Daniel was taken in the first in the year 605, when Nebuchadnezzar first came there, and so Daniel has been there for a while. He's well known for his ability to interpret dreams and visions, and so he has already done this when nobody else could. But yet Nebuchadnezzar is so what's the word? He is so taken by this vision that he digresses back to these people that can't help him, but yet for the one that can, he waits till the end to call him. And are we not like that a lot in our prayer life? We do everything in the world except go to the one that can help us. And so, but those are some things that I wanted you to see in that. There's another thing. I don't know how far we're going to get in this, but the very last verse of this, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase." That verse 37 there, chapter 4, verse 37, are the last recorded verses of Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible. So anyway, having said all that, and we talked a whole lot about other things, let's dig into this a little bit. And so it says here, and the dream is that Nebuchadnezzar, he's on his palace, and he's out overlooking his kingdom there, and he's known to be a prolific builder. In fact, we talk about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon that he built for his Median princess wife. And that's, even today, it's called one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. But he was quite the builder, and he just up there looking over that, and he was talking about what all I have done. There in verse 28, it says, "All this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar at the end of 12 months. He walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon, and the king spake and said, Is not this the great Babylon?" Now you got to get this picture of he's walking up on the roof, and a lot of the buildings in that day had flat roofs, and they had parapet walls, short walls built around the edge of the roof. And in that country where it was real hot, a lot of times people would go up there and sleep. And anyhow, he's up there and he's walking around, asleep because of the heat. He's up there walking around and he's looking at all this, and he's saying, he's bear in mind now, he's already had these visions about what's going to happen. And sometime later, a year after he's had these visions and these visits by these watchers, he has just listened to it. He's even listened to Daniel's interpretation of it, and he's ignored it. It didn't just come upon him. So anyway, he's business as usual, and he is just going right on with this thing. And he said, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built?" And he's got all these personal pronouns in this verse here. I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power, and for the honor of my majesty." And he says all this. And then it says, while the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, it is spoken. The kingdom is departed from thee." All the blessings that he has had down through life, all the things that God has given him, he's failed to recognize this. And so now God said, okay, you've crossed the line, and I'm getting ready to teach you a very valuable lesson. This is the last warning that he had. And so they go down there in that next few verses, and they begin to talk about what is going to overtake Nebuchadnezzar in this thing. And it's not a pretty picture, but he says, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee. Now, if we had the time, we could go over in some more verses, and we could see where that time means 7 years. 7 times means 1 year. So 7 years shall pass over ye. Now, being fair, not everybody sees that way, but most of your biblical commentators in this day and age, that's what they believe. It says, 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou shalt know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and give it to whomsoever he willeth. And so Nebuchadnezzar is going to, he's going to have some time to meditate on what's happening to him, and this meditation time is not going to be a fun time for him. And bearing in mind that he thinks he is as close to God as a man can get, because of all he thinks he has done and brought to him. But it says, then that same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dews of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. So for 7 years he has done this. There's a scientific word for that today, and it's boanthropy, and that is a thing where people actually believe they become animals, and people, scientists say that's probably what the circumstances was when they don't want to give God credit for anything. They always come up with some kind of off-the-wall excuse. But then, by the same time, I see, I don't understand it. I guess I'm too country for it, but I see people, ladies at Walmart or someplace, and they'll have fingernails out to here, or they're curled, and I'm really thinking in my mind, that's a lazy person, but that's not what we're here for today. But I see that today. I see people, and I know people that that are so attached to animals that it's hard to tell the difference in them sometimes, as far as they will go with that. But I see that kind of thing in the society that we live in today, that it's almost like it's that same, I'll call it a condition, and it's a crazy mindset, and that's my opinion on that. But anyway, this happened to Nebuchadnezzar. You have to understand here that this is the most powerful king in the world. He's living in a society where assassinations take place all the time, but yet he is going to be probably in the culture of this. He was probably taken to a secluded park or some type of a hilltop park where he could be kept and watched over while this came, because Daniel's very influential in the Babylonian court, and he's, I believe, in the context of what this is studying, that Daniel probably looked out for King Nebuchadnezzar, because you can get the drift as they go through here, that not only did Nebuchadnezzar like Daniel, but Daniel liked Nebuchadnezzar also, and so they had a relationship there. And so I see Daniel kind of looking out for him in the course of as their history went on there. But I thought about this as I went on down here into about as he lived outside, and we see God's grace upon him. He's a human being, but he is left in the outside in the elements, it doesn't matter, or in that part of the world over there, it gets cold and it gets hot. And, it's got these extremes on both sides. And we look and we think about how easy it would have been for disease to overtake him in that kind of environment. But yet at the same time, we see God working in this, that while, let's just say Nebuchadnezzar was in the valley, but God's working on him and teaching him a lesson. And that this is a very, sometimes God just has to get rough with you to teach all of us that we need to come down off of our high horse sometimes and realize that He is God and we are not. That's a phrase we hear around Temple Baptist Church quite a bit anymore, and we need to hear it, and not lose sight of the fact that we're not allowed to put God in a box. He's not going to allow that, and whatever it takes, if we have to spend some time in the woodshed, He will do whatever it takes to teach us that He is God, and that's what He's doing with Nebuchadnezzar here. And I thought at this, got down here to verse 34, it says there, well, it says in verse 33, it says the same hour that this came upon, was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and went on and did eat grass as oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair was grown like eagle's feathers. I can't imagine what your hair would look like after 7 years and just living outside like an animal, but I don't imagine he was a very pretty picture at the end of that. But then in verse 34, it says, at the end of his days. And I've chewed on that quite a little bit since I first started studying this, that at the end of his days, at the end of the days, not his days, but at the end of the days of this 7 times, these 7 years, when this time came up, it says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven. He looked and he realized what a mistake he had been making. But at the time, as a class, I just ask you to remember back at the end of your days, or the time. I think about, I was saved on Father's Day in 1982, and I think back at those times, at the end of the days when I was not living for the Lord, when I was living for self and all that, and God reached down at that. And when He reached down and I looked up and was saved in that, and that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. But his pronouns get a lot more humble after this as you go down through these next, actually 7, or not 7, but these next 4 or 5 verses. It says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven, excuse me, and mine understanding returned unto me, the wisdom and he was a very wise person. He was very actually, he thought he was the sum of wisdom, we might say. Don't want to go there too far because that'll come up in another lesson. But he said, mine understanding returned unto me, and he realized with the understanding that he had now, he had the understanding that there was somebody way above him, that there was a God in heaven. And it wasn't all these big bunch of gods that they all worshipped back in that time. This Baal worship and this plurality of gods. That there was a God that was Jehovah God, that was Daniel's God, and that He was the one that was in charge of everything. He said, I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored Him that liveth forever. And in those phrases there, he'll go down there in verse 37, and he'll use these verses again. And when you look at the language of them and see what they really meant, they're called intense verbs. And they are used in a sense that this became Nebuchadnezzar's life. This was his way of praising God and putting God up in his high place and keeping him down where he needed to be. That he just they were these intense verbs. They denoted a continuing action. That it wasn't just a one-time affair. He didn't just come down and like sometimes we see at the altar. And I'm not judging people. Their relationship with the Lord is theirs. It's not mine to judge them. But yet at the same time, when we see people that will come down to the altar and maybe make a profession of faith, and then you never see them again. Maybe even get baptized and you never see them again. And you wonder about things like that. And it's not my place to stamp them as saved or lost, because God can do a mighty work with people, and sometimes it takes time to bring them to where he wants them to be. But in this, Nebuchadnezzar, he says, I praised and honored him that liveth forever and ever. And then he goes on and he talks there about that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom is from generation to generation. God has shown him that while Nebuchadnezzar's, even Babylon, they only lasted for about 70 years, and then they were taken over by the Medo-Persians, and then after that the Greeks, and that, that's a big long history thing, but yet they were very all powerful, and probably the most powerful nation in the whole world for that 70 years that they were in power there. But yet Nebuchadnezzar is saying, as he praises and honors God, that there is a power greater. That he said that God's is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. Nebuchadnezzar is understanding that he's going to die one of these days. Something's going to happen. He's not going to be there, but yet God is. He's going to be there in this generation, the next, and the next, and the next. And so it says in verse 35, and all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted or reputed as nothing. That accounting term there, that compared to God, that we as human beings are nothing. We are reputed as nothing. I think that's not exactly. I think that it said what it meant to say there, but in God's eyes, we are something. We're not nothing, and we're not nothing. That's just the way it is. And he said, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, or the host of heaven, these angelic army that he has up there. Even Jesus said that if he wanted to, he could call legions of angels, or thousands upon thousands. And there's other places where it's innumerable number of angels, and he is the king and Lord over all of that. And among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand. Nobody can keep God from doing anything, or say unto him, why are you doing it? That's not in our prerogative to do as human beings. We just cannot do that. And he said then there in verse 36, at the same time that my reason returned unto me, for the glory of my kingdom and mine honor and brightness returned unto me, and my counselors and my lords sought unto me. And there again we see those are the people that kept Nebuchadnezzar safe while he was in this condition here. He said, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. When God taught him the lesson and he set Nebuchadnezzar back in place, he added more to him than what he had before. And so we see that. Actually, we see, historically speaking, where he was not as active in his, I don't know what you want to call it, in his government. After that, he was not as much in the forefront as everything that went in there. But what I wanted you to see, and I'm out of time, but I want you to see this thing. It says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. All these works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase." And so Nebuchadnezzar has learned his lesson and learned it well. And Nebuchadnezzar, you know, when I see this thing, this praise, extol, and honor, and then over here I see praise and honor in this other page, it's a pretty good way, pretty good start to a prayer life. And so anyway, I'm going to close on that and let this go. And thank you for your viewership. And as we work through Daniel, hang in there with us. And we got some pretty interesting lessons coming up. Have a good one.